The field stretched empty under the November dawn, a flat expanse of dried grass somewhere in rural Thailand, where the mist hadn't yet burned away. In the middle of it alone lay an elephant who had stopped trying to stand. Her name was Maya, though the logging company that owned her for 40 years had only ever called her by a number painted on her shoulder. She was 58 years old, which made her ancient by the standards of working elephants, and her body showed every year of it. The bones of her hips jutted against loose skin that hung in folds where muscle used to be. Her right eye was clouded white with cataracts blind for the last decade. Around her front left ankle, a ring of scarred tissue marked where chains had been fastened every single night since she was 4 years old. Dr. Priya Sharma found her just after sunrise. Priya had been a wildlife veterinarian for 12 years, long enough that she thought she'd seen every variation of human cruelty, but she still felt her stomach drop when she saw the elephant from the road. Maya was lying on her side in the posture of an animal who had given up her trunk, curled limply against the ground, her breathing shallow enough that Priya had to watch for several seconds to confirm the ribcage was still moving. A farmer had called the sanctuary the night before, saying there was an elephant in his field abandoned, and could someone please come get her before she died and contaminated his land. Priya approached, slowly speaking in the low, steady voice she used with traumatized animals, but Maya didn't react. Up close, the full extent of the neglect became clear. Maya's feet were cracked and infected, overgrown, and splitting from decades of walking on pavement without proper care. Her skin was stretched tight over her skull, dehydrated, covered in patches of raw sunburn where she'd had no shade. But it was the scars that told the real story. Beyond the ankle chains, there were marks across her shoulders where a bullhook had been used again and again, deep enough that they'd never fully healed. Slash marks on her trunk from being hit when she moved too slowly. And when Priya examined her mouth, she found several broken teeth snapped off at odd angles, likely from being forced to move logs that were too heavy. The thing that made Priya's hands shake as she set up her equipment wasn't the physical damage. She'd treated worse. It was the expression in Maya's one good eye when she finally opened it to look at Priya. There was no fear there, no hope, no curiosity, just a flat, exhausted acceptance. Maya had been left here to die, and she knew it, and some part of her seemed almost relieved that it would finally be over. What Priya didn't tell the sanctuary director during their phone call was what she'd found in the grass near Maya's head. A frayed rope cut clean through, still tied to a metal stake driven into the ground. Someone had tethered Maya here, left her food and water for perhaps a day or two, then cut her loose and disappeared. This wasn't accidental abandonment. The logging company had known exactly what they were doing. When a working elephant got too old to be profitable, you had 3 choices: pay for retirement care, pay for euthanasia, or drive her out to the middle of nowhere and let nature take its course. They'd chosen the cheapest option. Priya's team arrived by noon with medical supplies, food, water, and camping equipment. They set up a canopy to give Maya shade, started an IV to address the dehydration, and offered her every kind of food they had. Fresh fruit, vegetables, sugar cane, the specialized elephant pellets she would have been fed at the logging camp. Maya ignored all of it. She didn't resist the IV, didn't protest when they treated her wounds, didn't react when the mahout named Boone sat beside her and spoke softly. She just lay there with her eye closed, breathing. By evening, Priya was genuinely worried Maya wouldn't survive the night. Her temperature was low, her heartbeat irregular, and she still hadn't eaten or drunk anything voluntarily. Priya sat beside Maya as the sun went down, one hand resting on the elephant's shoulder, trying to think of what else she could do. The scarred skin under her palm was warm, the muscle beneath it still solid despite the starvation. 40 years of labor had built a body that refused to quit even when its spirit already had. Around midnight, Maya tried to stand. Her front legs braced her trunk, pushing against the ground for leverage, her whole body trembling with effort. She got about halfway up before her strength gave out, and she collapsed back down with a sound like thunder. Priya woke to the noise calling for Boone, but by the time he arrived, Maya had stopped moving again. They watched her for 20 minutes, but she didn't try a second time. Boone said quietly that it was a good sign. She still had fight in her. She just needed a reason to use it. The next morning, Boone walked half a mile down the road to where the sanctuary's temporary holding area was located. There were 3 elephants there, and Boone set up a speaker near their enclosure, then called Priya and told her to watch Maya. When he played the recording of elephant vocalizations, the deep rumbling calls that carried for miles, Maya's good ear swiveled toward the sound. Her eye opened. For the first time since they'd found her, she lifted her head off the ground. Priya felt something catch in her chest. Maya had been isolated from other elephants for 4 decades, chained alone every night, worked alone every day. But somewhere deep in her brain, the memory of connection still existed. Boone played the recording again louder this time, and Maya responded with a sound Priya had never heard her make. A rumble low and uncertain, like a question she'd forgotten how to ask. They played the recording on a loop for the next hour, and slowly, agonizingly, Maya began to move. First her head lifting fully, then her front legs bracing, then with Boone murmuring encouragement and Priya holding her breath, Maya stood. It took her 5 tries, and when she finally managed it, she swayed so badly that Priya thought she'd fall again, but she didn't. She stood there trembling, her legs locked her trunk, hanging loose, and she turned her head toward the direction of the sound. Toward the other elephants she couldn't see, but knew were there. Getting her onto the truck took another 3 hours. Maya could barely walk, managing only a few steps at a time before needing to rest, but she was moving toward the sound. They'd backed the transport vehicle as close as they could and built a gradual ramp, and Maya climbed it with Boone walking beside her the entire way, one hand on her shoulder. When she finally stepped into the truck and they closed the gate behind her, Priya felt like she'd just witnessed a resurrection. The sanctuary was only 40 minutes away, but Priya spent the entire drive in the back of the truck with Maya monitoring her vitals, watching for signs of distress. Maya stood perfectly still, her head low, her breathing labored but steady. When they arrived and opened the gate, Maya didn't move. She stood in the truck looking out at the forested enclosure at the pond and the shade trees and the other elephants in the distance, and she didn't take a single step forward. Boone had to coax her out, and Maya followed him like a machine following programming. They'd prepared a separate area for her, a 1/4 acre of soft grass with a shelter and fresh water. Maya walked into it, walked to the center, and stopped. Then she just stood there. She didn't explore, didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't lie down. She stood in the exact center of the enclosure with her trunk hanging limply and her eye half closed, and she didn't move for the next 6 hours. Priya watched Maya from outside the fence as night fell, and she felt the first real flicker of doubt. They'd gotten Maya here alive, which was more than she'd expected, but alive wasn't the same as saved. She'd seen this before with severely abused animals, this shutdown state where the body kept functioning, but the mind had retreated somewhere unreachable. Learned helplessness, the researchers called it. When an animal had been hurt so many times that it stopped trying to avoid pain, stopped responding to danger, stopped believing that anything it did mattered. Maya had spent 40 years being punished for every moment of resistance, rewarded for nothing but absolute obedience. And now that she was finally free, she had no idea what to do with that freedom. On the 3rd day, Maya still hadn't eaten. She'd drunk a little water enough to keep her alive, but she refused every type of food they offered. She just stood in the same spot, barely moving her body, growing weaker by the hour. Priya ran blood tests that showed dangerous levels of malnutrition and dehydration, but there was nothing she could do if Maya wouldn't eat voluntarily. Force-feeding an elephant was technically possible, but incredibly stressful, and in Maya's condition, the stress might kill her faster than the starvation. Boone knocked on Priya's office door that afternoon and said he had an idea. The sanctuary had another elephant named Lakshmi, a 52-year-old female who'd been rescued from a similar situation 8 years ago. Lakshmi had come from a temple where she'd been kept alone for 3 decades, forced to give blessings to tourists beaten when she got tired. When she'd first arrived at the sanctuary, she'd been in the same shutdown state as Maya. It had taken months for her to recover, but she had, and now she was one of the calmest, most nurturing elephants they had. Boone thought that if any elephant could reach Maya, it would be Lakshmi. They brought Lakshmi to the fence of Maya's enclosure just before sunset. Lakshmi approached slowly, rumbling softly, and Maya didn't react. She just stood there with that same blank expression, her trunk hanging loose. Lakshmi pressed her trunk against the fence, reaching toward Maya, calling to her with sounds too low for human ears to fully register. Nothing. Priya was about to call it off when Lakshmi did something unexpected. She reached her trunk through the fence, extending it as far as she could, and very gently touched Maya's ear. Not pushing, not demanding attention, just touching, the kind of gentle, grooming contact that elephants use to comfort each other. Maya's ear twitched, then slowly, like a machine powering on. After decades of disuse, her trunk began to lift. It rose in small increments, trembling with effort, until finally it extended toward Lakshmi. The two trunks touched just the tips, and Maya made a sound. A small rumble, hesitant and uncertain, but a sound. Priya felt tears on her face and didn't bother wiping them away. The two elephants touched trunks through the fence for nearly 10 minutes before Lakshmi finally pulled away and walked back toward her own enclosure. Maya watched her go, her trunk still raised, and for the first time since they'd found her, there was something in her eye that looked almost like awareness. That night, Maya ate. Not much, just a few mouthfuls of grass, but it was the first food she'd voluntarily consumed in 4 days. Priya found her in the morning, standing in a slightly different spot, which meant she'd moved during the night. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. They brought Lakshmi back the next day, and this time they opened the gate between the enclosures. Lakshmi walked through and approached Maya directly, and Maya let her. Lakshmi circled her, slowly rumbling, touching her with gentle sweeps of her trunk, running it over Maya's scarred shoulders and broken teeth and infected feet. Maya stood perfectly still through all of it, but she didn't pull away, didn't retreat. When Lakshmi finally settled down in the grass beside her, Maya did something Priya had begun to think she'd never see. She lowered herself down too. It wasn't a full rest, not yet. Maya didn't lie on her side, didn't relax completely. She knelt with her legs folded under her, her trunk resting on the ground, her weight still partially supported, ready to stand at a moment's notice. But she was down, and Lakshmi was beside her, and they stayed that way for almost an hour. When Maya finally stood again, she took 3 steps to the left toward the water trough and drank deeply for the first time. Then she pulled up a trunkful of grass and ate it. Then another. Priya watched from her office window and felt something unclench in her chest. Over the next 2 weeks, the changes accelerated. Maya began following Lakshmi around the enclosure, mimicking her behaviors, relearning how to be an elephant instead of a machine. She started eating regularly, putting on weight, her skin regaining some of its elasticity. Her movements became more fluid, less mechanical. But there were still moments when the trauma resurfaced. Loud noises made her flinch and freeze. Sudden movements from humans made her back away, with her ears pinned flat. And she still hadn't lain down, fully still hadn't allowed herself to be that vulnerable. She slept standing up, and Priya knew that until Maya felt safe enough to truly rest, she hadn't fully healed. Boone suggested the mud bath. Elephants loved mud, using it to cool down, protect their skin, socialize play. The sanctuary had built a shallow wallow in Maya's enclosure, warm and inviting. Lakshmi used it constantly, rolling and splashing with obvious joy, but Maya wouldn't go near it. She'd stand at the edge watching Lakshmi, her trunk extended toward the water, like she wanted to touch it, but she never took the final step. Priya understood why. In logging camps, mud meant being stuck, meant being vulnerable to punishment. Maya had probably been beaten for stopping to cool off, for taking any kind of unauthorized break. It was Lakshmi who finally convinced her. On a particularly hot afternoon in late December, Lakshmi climbed into the wallow and didn't just bathe, she performed. She rolled dramatically, splashing water everywhere, trumpeting with exaggerated pleasure, spraying mud in the air like a fountain. It was such obvious theater that Priya actually laughed. Lakshmi was showing Maya how it was done, demonstrating that this was safe, that this was allowed, that this was fun. Maya watched from 5 feet away, her trunk swaying back and forth in what Priya had learned to recognize as indecision. Then very slowly she extended one foot and placed it in the edge of the water. Nothing bad happened. No one yelled at her. No one hit her. No punishment came. Maya stood there with one foot in the water for at least 3 minutes, testing this new reality before she took another step. Then, another. Then she was standing in the shallow end, the mud covering her feet, and Lakshmi rumbled encouragement from where she lay, completely submerged. Maya's trunk dipped down, touched the water, pulled back. Dipped again. Then she lowered herself to her knees, and the water rose to her chest. And for just a second, Priya saw her trunk curl in what looked almost like a smile. Maya didn't fully submerge that first time, but she stayed in the water for 20 minutes, and when she climbed out, her movements were looser, less guarded. That night, for the first time since arriving at the sanctuary, she lay down fully. Priya saw it on the security camera footage the next morning. At 3 a.m, with Lakshmi already asleep beside her, Maya had finally lowered herself onto her side, stretched her legs out, and rested her head on the ground. She'd stayed that way for 4 hours, the longest period of true rest she'd probably had in decades. The physical recovery continued over the following months. Maya gained 200 kilograms. Her ribs disappeared under healthy flesh, her skin smoothed out, her eyes brightened. The infections in her feet cleared up with treatment. Her broken teeth were filed down to prevent pain. The scars would never fully fade, but they stopped looking raw and started looking like old history instead of fresh wounds. But it was the behavioral changes that told Priya the real healing was happening. Maya started exploring her enclosure, investigating everything with her trunk, testing boundaries, expressing opinions. When she didn't like a particular type of fruit, she threw it on the ground instead of dutifully eating it. When she wanted attention, she rumbled until someone came over. Small acts of agency that would mean nothing in a healthy elephant, but meant everything in one who'd been trained for 40 years to have no will of her own. She developed preferences, routines, friendships. She and Lakshmi became inseparable, sleeping side by side every night, grazing together during the day, communicating in the low-frequency rumbles that Priya could feel more than hear. But there were still triggers. In her second week at the sanctuary, a volunteer accidentally dropped a metal bucket near Maya's enclosure, and the clang sent Maya into a full panic. She backed into the corner, her ears flat against her head, her trunk tucked protectively against her chest, trembling so violently that Priya thought she might collapse. It took Lakshmi 15 minutes of gentle rumbling and trunk touches to calm her down. And even then, Maya remained agitated for hours, flinching at every sound. Priya made a note in her chart: loud metallic noises, probable association with bullhook strikes or chains. The team adjusted their protocols, moving more carefully around her, speaking in quieter voices, avoiding anything that might trigger those deep-buried memories. 6 weeks after her arrival, they introduced Maya to the larger herd. It was a carefully orchestrated process, starting with visual contact through fencing, then supervised interactions in a neutral space, then finally opening the gates and letting Maya choose whether to join them. Priya watched anxiously as Maya stood at the boundary between her safe enclosure and the larger world beyond. Lakshmi had already walked through rumbling encouragement, and the rest of the herd, 3 other females and 2 juveniles, stood in the distance, watching with obvious curiosity. Maya took 1 step forward, then stopped. Her trunk lifted, testing the air processing information through scent and sound that Priya couldn't access. The herd's matriarch, an elephant named Sita, approached slowly and stopped 10 feet away. She was older than Maya, 63 years old, and she'd been at the sanctuary longer than anyone. She rumbled a deep sound that Priya felt in her sternum, and Maya's ears came forward, not pinned in fear but alert listening. Sita rumbled again, and this time Maya answered. It was the longest vocalization Priya had ever heard her make, a complex series of sounds that went on for nearly 30 seconds. Whatever Maya said, it was enough. Sita closed the distance between them, extended her trunk, and touched Maya's face with a gentleness that made Priya's throat tighten. The rest of the herd moved in surrounding Maya, touching her with their trunks, rumbling, welcoming her. And Maya, who had spent 4 decades in isolation, who had been trained to believe she was alone, stood in the center of that circle and made a sound that Priya had only ever heard elephants make when they were reunited with family. A trumpeting call of recognition of joy of finally coming home. The transformation over the next 6 months was remarkable. Maya integrated fully into the herd's social structure, establishing bonds, learning rhythms, participating in the complex interactions that defined elephant society. She spent hours with the juveniles, letting them climb on her play, around her feet, test her patience with their antics. Priya watched one afternoon as a 2-year-old male named Kavi repeatedly stole fruit from Maya's pile, and instead of the shutdown obedience she would have shown before Maya gently pushed him away with her trunk. Not aggressive, just setting a boundary. When he tried again, she picked up a piece of fruit and handed it to him deliberately, and Priya realized she was watching Maya choose to share rather than have something taken from her. The difference was everything, but it was what happened with a newly rescued elephant that showed Priya just how far Maya had come. In late June, the sanctuary took in another logging elephant, a 38-year-old female named Devi, who arrived in similar condition to how Maya had been. Starved, scarred, shut down. The team went through the same protocols, the same careful rehabilitation, but Devi was struggling. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't engage, stood in the corner of her enclosure with the same flat, hopeless expression that Maya had worn. They tried everything, including introducing Lakshmi, but nothing was working. On the 4th day, Maya appeared at the fence of Devi's enclosure. No one had brought her there. She'd simply walked over on her own, leaving the rest of the herd behind. She stood at the fence looking at Devi, and she began to rumble. It was different from the sound she made with her herd, slower and deeper, almost mournful. Devi's ear twitched, but she didn't move. Maya kept rumbling, kept calling, and finally she did something that made Priya's eyes fill with tears. She reached her trunk through the fence as far as it would go, in exactly the same gesture that Lakshmi had used on her 7 months earlier. The gentle touch to the ear, the invitation to connection. Devi's response was slow, but it came. Her trunk lifted extended, touched Maya's. And Maya, who had learned from Lakshmi what it meant to be patient, to be present, to offer comfort, without demanding anything in return, stood there and let Devi take as long as she needed. They stayed that way for over an hour, trunks touching through the fence. And when Priya finally opened the gate to let Maya into the enclosure, Maya walked straight to Devi and stood beside her. Just stood there, solid and calm, a living demonstration that survival was possible, that healing was possible, that there was life after 40 years of chains. Devi did that night, just like Maya had just a few mouthfuls of grass, but it was a beginning. And over the following weeks, as Devi started her own slow recovery, Maya stayed close. She showed Devi how to use the mud bath, how to interact with the herd, how to rest without fear. She did for Devi exactly what Lakshmi had done for her, and in doing so, she completed her own transformation. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She had purpose, connection, agency. She had become, after 4 decades of being treated, like a machine fully herself. A year after Maya's arrival, Priya stood at the fence of the main enclosure, watching the herd settle in for the evening. Maya was in the center, surrounded by the others, her trunk relaxed and her eyes half closed in contentment. Devi was beside her, along with 2 other elephants who'd been rescued in recent months, all of them drawn to Maya's calm presence. The juveniles were playing in the distance, their squeals and trumpets carrying across the enclosure. Lakshmi was in the mud bath as usual, completely submerged except for her trunk. Sita stood under the largest tree, watching over everything with the patient authority of a matriarch. Maya's body showed the evidence of her past. The scars on her ankles and shoulders, the broken teeth, the blind eye, the way she still flinched, sometimes at sudden movements. But her body also showed the evidence of her present. The healthy weight, the smooth skin, the confident stance, the trunk that moved with purpose and curiosity instead of hanging limp. She had gained back everything the logging camp had taken, and more. She had gained a family, a home, a future. Boone walked up beside Priya, carrying his evening checklist, and they stood together in comfortable silence. After a while, Priya asked if he thought Maya understood how remarkable her recovery had been. Boone was quiet for a moment, watching Maya interact with the younger elephants, her trunk gentle as she guided one away from the fence. Then he said that elephants didn't think about recovery the way humans did. They didn't measure progress or celebrate milestones. They just lived moment to moment and trusted that each moment would be better than the last. Maya didn't know she'd done anything remarkable. She just knew she was safe now, and loved and free. As the sun set over the sanctuary painting, everything in shades of gold and amber, Maya lowered herself to the ground. Not hesitant, not testing, just lying down with the easy confidence of someone who knew she'd wake up in the same safe place. The other elephants settled around her, and within minutes the entire herd was at rest. Priya watched them for a long time, these elephants who'd all been broken in different ways and had all found their way back to wholeness. 40 years of work, she thought. 18 months to remember how to live, and all the years after that, just to be herself. She turned away from the fence and headed back to her office, leaving the herd to their dreams, their safety, their hard-won peace.